The woman considered her grandmother's old chest of drawers to be ordinary junk. But when she opened the bottom drawer, it became clear that this chest of drawers held something that could change her life. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The town of Ridgewood appeared slowly through the windshield as Meredith Harper drove the last stretch of County Road, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than she meant to. Early autumn light hung low over the horizon, turning the familiar hills into long, dark shapes that reached across the landscape like memories she'd tried to outrun. She hadn't been back in nearly 20 years, and now, returning, felt like peeling open an old wound she'd never let heal. Beside her, her 17-year-old son, Ethan, sat quietly, earbuds dangling around his neck, though no music played. He'd always been like this on long drives, silent, thoughtful, lost in his own private world. But today the silence felt heavier, denser, filled with something she didn't yet understand. Perhaps he sensed her nerves. Perhaps he had his own. Either way, the quiet between them hummed like an undercurrent ready to break. When the faded welcome sign finally appeared. Welcome to Ridgewood, Estartertita in 1884. Meredith felt her stomach tighten. The sign hadn't changed at all. Neither had the main road that wound into town, lined with the same old storefronts she remembered from childhood. The bakery with the striped awning. The barber shop that still boasted haircuts for $8, though she doubted the price was remotely accurate now. The hardware store run by the same family for 3 generations. Everything seemed frozen in the past, preserved in a way that made her uneasy. Ridgewood had always been like this, stubborn, unmoving, clinging to its own version of history. The house waited at the end of Maple Ridge Lane, quiet and dark beneath the tall oaks. Meredith slowed the car and turned into the driveway, gravel crunching softly beneath the tires. The house was exactly as she remembered it. 2 stories, weathered gray siding, the porch sagging just enough to suggest it needed repairs. Her mother's house? Her childhood home, a place she had spent her entire teenage life trying to escape. She parked and turned off the engine. For a few seconds, she didn't move. Ethan finally broke the silence. "Looks old," he said, studying the house with an expression she couldn't read. "It is old," Meredith replied. She didn't know what else to say. They stepped out of the car, and Meredith felt the air shift around her. It was the scent of fallen leaves, damp earth, and something else. Something faintly like dust-covered memories. She unlocked the front door, the key sticking in the lock for a moment before turning. When the door swung open, the smell hit her immediately. Stale air that had been trapped for months. Dust. Faint perfume that belonged to her mother and still clung to the curtains. She flicked on the light. The living room looked untouched, exactly as she had left it after the funeral. A stack of unread mail sat on the side table. A blanket remained folded on the armchair. The rug still bore the slight indentation of the coffee table that had been moved aside long ago. "Creepy," Ethan muttered softly behind her, though not unkindly. He wasn't afraid, just overwhelmed. Meredith didn't blame him. She felt overwhelmed, too. They made a slow circuit through the house, checking windows, rooms, closets. Every space held something familiar, yet everything felt different in a way she couldn't articulate. The kitchen still held chipped plates she remembered from her childhood, though a thin layer of dust covered everything. Her old room upstairs was empty, except for the faded wallpaper her mother had never bothered to remove. And then there was the attic. She hesitated at the bottom of the pull-down stairs. The wooden cord dangled above her, swaying slightly. She had avoided this place every time she visited as an adult. The attic had always belonged to her mother. Locked, forbidden, a place of secrets. But now there was no one left to tell her not to climb up. She pulled the cord, and the creaky stairs unfolded with a groan. Dust puffed out like breath from some long, sleeping creature. "Want me to go first?" Ethan asked. His voice was steady, but she caught a hint of concern in his eyes. She nodded. He climbed ahead of her, pushing open the attic door. Light spilled in through the single round window, illuminating dust motes that floated like tiny ghosts. The space was cluttered with old boxes, broken furniture, and piles of blankets. The air was thick, dense with the smell of old paper and wood. And then Meredith saw it. The dresser. Dark wood. Heavy, ornate carvings along the sides. Tarnished brass handles. It stood against the far wall, like a relic that didn't belong anywhere else in the room. She hadn't thought about that dresser in years, but the moment her eyes landed on it, she felt a jolt of recognition so sharp it almost hurt. She remembered being 5, reaching toward it with small, curious hands, only for her mother to yank her back and hiss, "Don't touch that. You leave that alone, Meredith. Do you hear me? It's not for you." Not for you. The words echoed in her mind even now. "That thing looks ancient," Ethan said, stepping closer. "Why keep something like that in the attic?" "My mother didn't let anyone touch it," Meredith said without thinking. "Not me. Not herself. She always said it belonged to the past." "And we're supposed to just leave it here?" Ethan asked, lifting a brow. She didn't know how to answer him. Part of her wanted to leave it exactly where it was, still locked away in shadows, exactly as her mother had intended. But another part, a deeper, quieter part, felt the unmistakable pull of something unresolved. "We'll decide later," she said finally. They began opening boxes, sorting through old photographs and linens. But every few minutes, Meredith would glance toward the dresser. Each time, the feeling in her chest tightened. After nearly an hour, Ethan approached the dresser again. He ran his fingertips along the frame, tracing the carvings. "It's actually kind of cool," he said. "Like something from another century." "It's just old," Meredith said automatically. But even to her own ears, her tone betrayed something else, an uneasiness she didn't want to acknowledge. Ethan carefully tugged on one of the drawers. It stuck at first, then slid open with a low scrape. Inside were neatly folded linens, untouched for decades. He tried the next drawer, and then the next. The bottom drawer, however, resisted. "Weird," he murmured. He examined the edges, pressing experimentally on the decorative trim. The dresser responded with the faintest dull thud. "Mom," he said, his voice shifting. "I think there's something behind here." She swallowed. "Leave it for now. We've already done enough today." "I could try to fix it," Ethan offered, unaware of the tension in her voice. "I've been wanting something to work on. My hands, they get restless." She knew he meant more than just his hands. He needed something to keep him grounded, something to distract him from the cruelty he faced at school. Something that wasn't the bruises of loneliness or the ache of never fitting in. "All right," she said softly. "But be careful. It's old." They spent the rest of the afternoon organizing the attic, or at least making an attempt. But no matter how many boxes they moved, the presence of the dresser loomed. When evening came and they descended into the house again, Meredith felt exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. She cooked a simple dinner while Ethan sat at the kitchen table, doodling idly on a scrap of paper. The silence settled comfortably for once, but later, when she went to bed, she found sleep impossible. The dresser lingered in her mind like a whisper she couldn't quite decipher. She tossed and turned, replaying memories she had tried to forget. Her mother's strained expression whenever the dresser was mentioned. The hurried way she had always pushed Meredith out of the attic. The way her voice cracked when she warned her never to open it. It was well past midnight when she heard soft footsteps outside her door. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was hushed. "Are you awake?" She sat up. "Yes. What is it?" I couldn't sleep, he said, lingering in the doorway. I keep thinking about that dresser. She tried to smile, but her pulse quickened. It's just an old piece of furniture. Then why does it feel like more than that? He asked. She didn't have an answer. Ethan hesitated, then said quietly, I know things have been hard, for both of us. But maybe fixing it could help. You know, give us something to do together. The vulnerability in his voice broke her. She nodded slowly. All right, she whispered. Tomorrow. He nodded and returned to his room. Meredith lay awake long after he left, staring at the ceiling, knowing tomorrow would be different. Knowing something had shifted in the air, something about the house, the attic, the dresser. Something that felt like a warning and an invitation all at once. Morning came gray and cool. Ethan skipped breakfast and went straight to the attic with a toolbox he'd found in the garage. Meredith followed more slowly, feeling the weight of memory with every step. When she reached the attic, Ethan was already kneeling beside the dresser, inspecting the base with careful attention. There's definitely something off, he said without looking up. Look at this. He pressed on a carved flower near the bottom corner. A faint sound echoed, a muted click, the kind that didn't belong to simple old wood. Meredith's breath caught. Stop, she said sharply. He froze and looked up at her. Why? It's just... I said stop. He sat back, confusion clouding his face. She exhaled shakily. I'm sorry. I don't want anything breaking. It's delicate. It's old. Ethan studied her face for a moment. You're scared of it, he said quietly. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come, because it was true. She didn't know why, but she was afraid. Terrified even. Maybe it's nothing, she said. Maybe we should leave it alone. But even as she said it, the dresser seemed to pulse with a quiet presence behind her words. Ethan didn't argue, not out loud. But she saw the stubborn resolve set in his jaw, the same look she had worn as a teenager whenever she sensed something wasn't right. They returned downstairs, but Meredith couldn't shake the feeling that a door had cracked open, one she wasn't prepared to walk through, yet one she knew she wouldn't be able to avoid forever. That night, she was almost asleep when she heard the faint creak of the attic stairs. Soft footsteps, the distant scrape of wood. She knew immediately that Ethan had gone back up there, unable to resist the pull of the mystery. And even though fear twisted in her stomach, she didn't call him back. Because part of her, some deep, buried part, wanted him to keep going. Wanted him to open whatever her mother had spent her life hiding. Wanted to finally know the truth she had lived so long without. On the edge of sleep, she imagined the sound of a small metallic click echoing from the attic above, like the first breath of a long-buried secret beginning to wake. The sound that woke Meredith the next morning was not the alarm clock she had forgotten to set, nor the creak of old pipes, nor even the wind outside pressing against the window frames. It was something softer, lighter, an almost imperceptible shift in the air, the kind of sound a house makes when someone is moving quietly through its bones. She opened her eyes to the pale light of dawn seeping through the curtains and listened. The floorboards above her groaned under careful, deliberate footsteps. Ethan was in the attic again. For a moment, she remained still, letting the early light wash over her, trying to steady the unease that had followed her from sleep. Then she swung her legs out of bed and stood, the hard wood cool beneath her feet. She didn't rush. Something inside her whispered that rushing would only lead her to answers she wasn't ready for. She moved through the hallway, heard the faint metallic scrape from above, and felt her heart thump deeper in her chest. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking in the quiet house. When she reached the attic ladder, she saw the cord swaying slightly, as if recently touched. She took a breath and pulled it down. The ladder unfolded with its usual groan, and she climbed up. Ethan knelt in front of the dresser, his back to her, a flashlight wedged between his shoulder and cheek. The muted beam illuminated the lower panel of the dresser. His fingers traced the carvings, pausing on the small flower near the base. He pressed it again, softly, tentatively, just as she had heard the night before. The muted click echoed through the attic like a tiny secret finally exhaling. "Ethan," Meredith said quietly. He startled and turned, nearly dropping the flashlight. "Mom, I didn't think you'd be up." "I heard you," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. "You should have woken me. I didn't want to. He looked back at the dresser. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Neither could she. Not really. But acknowledging that felt like stepping into something irreversible. He pressed the panel again. "I think this is the trigger, and I think there's more than one." "You're sure?" He nodded. "It's not just decorative. The wood around it is worn differently, like it's meant to be touched." A chill moved through Meredith, not from the cold attic air, but from something deeper. She stepped closer despite herself. She couldn't shake the memory of her mother's voice, sharp, fearful, commanding her to stay away. But her mother wasn't here now, and the dresser was no longer a forbidden relic. It was a question begging to be answered. Ethan pressed the flower again, then moved his fingers along the carved edge of the drawer. "Here," he said, pointing to a vine-like pattern etched into the wood. "See that? The carving dips in a little, like a groove. I think it's another pressure point." He pressed gently, and this time the click was louder, more decisive, followed by a faint metallic rattle from somewhere inside the dresser. Something shifted. Meredith felt the hair rise on her arms. That came from inside. Ethan's eyes widened with excitement. "There's definitely a hidden compartment." He crouched lower, studying the base as though deciphering a map. As she watched him work, Meredith felt the strangest sensation like déjà vu mixed with dread. She remembered her mother standing before this dresser, her back rigid, her hands trembling ever so slightly whenever Meredith wandered too close. Her mother wasn't a fearful woman by nature, but something about this piece of furniture had unsettled her. Something buried inside it had been too much for her to face. Ethan pressed a third carved shape. This time, a small, rounded leaf on the opposite side. A sharper click echoed through the attic, followed by a soft, grinding noise. The drawer shifted forward by itself, just an inch, but enough to send both of them still. "Oh my God," Ethan whispered. A moment passed where neither of them moved. Then Ethan gently tugged on the drawer. It slid outward, but not like a normal drawer. The bottom of it lifted slightly, revealing a shallow wooden panel beneath. Ethan placed both hands on the panel and lifted. The hidden compartment opened like a breath held for decades. Inside were several objects, all neatly arranged, untouched by dust, as though the dresser had been sealed only yesterday rather than half a century ago. Meredith leaned closer, her breath caught in her throat. The topmost item was a stack of worn, leather-bound notebooks, their edges frayed, but carefully wrapped in twine. Beside them lay a thick envelope, bearing a handwritten note in faded ink. "For the one who finds this first." Below these rested a tarnished trophy. Small, silver-plated, and engraved with the initials, M.H. Meredith's blood ran cold. "Mom," Ethan whispered, "are those your dad's initials?" She nodded slowly, unable to speak. Her father, the man she had spent her entire life believing had abandoned her, the man her mother never spoke of, beyond whispered warnings and quick dismissals, the man she had tried so hard to forget because the pain of remembering was too heavy. Her hands shook as she reached into the compartment and touched the top of the leather notebooks. The moment her fingers grazed the covers, A rush of memories flooded her. Her mother's tight-lipped expression whenever she asked questions. The way conversations about her father always ended abruptly. The heaviness that hung in the air when his name was spoken aloud. She lifted the notebooks from the drawer and set them gently on the attic floor. When she untied the twine and opened the first one, she saw a name written in elegant cursive on the inside cover. Evelyn Harper. Her grandmother. A woman she barely remembered. Soft hands, a gentle voice, and eyes that always seemed to be watching something far beyond the present moment. She turned the page. The diary began simply enough, with entries from the early 1940s, describing war rationing, the harsh winters, the struggle to keep food on the table. But as Meredith flipped through more pages, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew sharp, urgent. The entries described things she hadn't expected. Corruption in the police department, shady activity among prominent families, quiet threats whispered in alleys, and the strange disappearance of townspeople who had questioned too much. "This is insane," Ethan breathed, leaning over her shoulder. Meredith continued reading, captivated and horrified. Her grandmother wrote about fear. Fear of powerful men in the town, fear for her son's safety, fear of the truth being buried forever. And then came a sentence that made Meredith's breath stop completely. "They are trying to frame my son." Her pulse beat in her ears as she read the next pages. Entry after entry detailed how her father, Michael Hendricks, had been pressured to throw a championship match, how he had refused, and how influential families had conspired against him. They had staged the theft of a trophy, planted items in his locker, coerced witnesses, and orchestrated a scandal that forced him to flee the town to avoid violence, or worse. Ethan sat completely still beside her, absorbing every word. "So he didn't leave because he wanted to," Ethan said quietly. "He left because they forced him to." Meredith swallowed, her throat tight. For years she had lived with anger and abandonment. For years she had believed her father escaped responsibility, escaped family, escaped her. But none of it had been true. Every chapter of the diary revealed more layers of cruelty and manipulation than she could have imagined. She picked up the trophy next. The engraving glinted faintly in the dim attic light. Ridgewood Regional Championship, 1958, MH. "This proves he won," Ethan said. "They erased him from everything, didn't they?" "Yes," Meredith replied, her voice hollow. "They erased him. They erased everything." Her hands trembled as she reached for the thick envelope. The paper crackled with age. She opened it and pulled out the letter. "For the one who finds this first," it began, "I pray you are ready for the truth." The letter told a story of a town ruled by three powerful families. Families whose influence bled into the courts, the police, the schools. Families who destroyed lives for convenience. Families who feared losing their grip on control. It also spoke of Evelyn's heartbreak, losing her son, losing her fight, losing her hope that justice would come in her lifetime. So she hid everything in the dresser, believing that someday, someone in the family would uncover the truth and be brave enough to carry it forward. When Meredith reached the final lines of the letter, she felt tears sting her eyes. "The truth will save our family, but it may also endanger you. Only open this path if you are prepared to walk it together." She lowered the letter slowly. The attic felt colder, smaller, as though the walls had inched inward. Ethan exhaled shakily. "Mom, this is huge." She nodded, still staring at the words on the page. The air felt too thin. Her memories scrambled. Everything she had believed about her childhood, about her father, about her mother's silence, was unraveling, revealing wounds she had never known she carried. She closed the letter gently and looked at Ethan. "We need to be careful." He nodded, but there was a spark in his eyes, a determination she recognized. He had always been bright, perceptive, and painfully aware of injustice. What he saw now wasn't just a family secret. It was a story that demanded answers. He spoke softly, but firmly. "We can't ignore this, Mom." "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't." She felt her mother's shadow in the attic, the fear, the protectiveness, the silence. But she also felt Evelyn's voice rising from the pages, urging her forward. Together, they gathered the diaries, the letter, the trophy, the old photographs, and the documents carefully wrapped in cloth beneath the notebooks. As they carried the items downstairs, the house felt different, less like a mausoleum of old memories, and more like a crossroads. They set everything on the kitchen table and stood side by side, staring at the evidence of a buried past. The silence stretched until Ethan finally asked, "What now?" Meredith looked at him, at the young man her son was becoming. Sharp, compassionate, courageous. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, dangerous even. But she also knew they were already too far in to turn back. "We read everything," she said. "We learned the truth, all of it." "And then?" Ethan asked. "And then," she said softly, "we decide what to do with it." But even as she said the words, she felt the gravity of the journey before them. She felt the unease stirring in her chest again, the same uneasy intuition that had followed her since they stepped into the attic. She knew one thing with a clarity that chilled her. Once a secret begins to wake, it does not go back to sleep. And the dresser upstairs, the one her mother had guarded like a gate to another life, had just opened a door that neither of them could close again. As she looked at the diaries spread across the table, she felt something shift inside her, something heavy and resolute. The truth had found them, and it would not be ignored. The past, long buried in dust and silence, had risen, and their lives, hers, Ethan's, their family's story, would never be the same again. The morning after they uncovered the hidden compartment, Meredith woke with the uneasy sense that someone had shifted the axis of her life while she slept. The world felt tilted, the air heavier, the silence sharper. She lay still for several minutes, the memory of Evelyn's diary entries flickering through her mind, like fragments of a dream she wished she could unsee. But they were no dream. They were truth, raw, old, buried truth clawing its way to the surface. When she finally rose, the house felt different, not hostile, not welcoming, just alert. As if it too knew something monumental had been disturbed. The kitchen table remained cluttered with the evidence they had carried down from the attic diaries, the tarnished trophy, faded photographs, brittle letters, documents wrapped in cloth. Nothing had changed physically, but somehow the objects seemed heavier than they had last night, as though the weight of history had settled into them overnight. Ethan sat at the table already, elbows on the wood, flipping through one of the diaries. His hair was unbrushed, sleep still clung to his eyes, but he looked more awake than she felt. She joined him, pulling a chair out quietly and sitting beside him. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "I kept thinking about Grandpa Michael, and your grandmother, and the families she wrote about. It's like we're holding a whole different version of the town's history." Meredith stared at the diary in his hands, a version no one wanted us to see. Ethan set the diary down and gestured toward the envelope. "We should keep reading the letter." She nodded. "We should. But we need to go slow. We don't know what we're walking into." Ethan met her gaze, determination in his eyes. "We're already walking into it." She couldn't deny that. Whatever road lay ahead, They had stepped onto it the moment they opened the false panel in the dresser. There was no going back. She picked up Evelyn's letter, smoothing its creased edges. The paper was softer than it had been decades ago, the ink browned with age. The next paragraphs were about names. Names, Evelyn feared. Names she hoped her granddaughter would remember if the family ever needed to confront the truth. The families Evelyn had written about were ones Meredith recognized all too well from her own childhood. The Lockwoods, the Harringtons, and the Rowan family. In a small town, anyone with money or influence was easily known, and these families had ruled Ridgewood like an unofficial council. They owned local businesses, funded elections, controlled land, and had hands in nearly every major decision the town made. Evelyn's letter painted a darker picture than the polite veneer Meredith remembered seeing at school fundraisers and seasonal festivals. According to the letter, the Lockwoods had bribed local officers and manipulated school boards. The Harringtons used their construction company to launder money through public projects. The Rowans controlled the police department itself, pulling strings in legal matters that benefited their friends and punished those who defied them. One line in the letter chilled Meredith more than the rest. "Your father discovered what they were doing." The rest of the page described how Michael Hendricks lost his championship because he refused to cooperate with them. They framed him with planted evidence and forced him to flee. But they hadn't stopped there. They spread rumors, manipulated public opinion, and created a story that painted him as dishonorable, reckless, and dangerous. "They destroyed him," Meredith whispered, her voice cracking. "They destroyed his name." Ethan leaned closer. "But they didn't take this," he said, tapping the trophy. "Your grandmother saved everything she could." Meredith closed her eyes. The memory of her mother's fear came back, the way she never let Meredith ask questions, the way she avoided any mention of Michael Hendricks. Her mother must have known pieces of the truth, maybe even all of it. But instead of fighting, she had buried it, just like the dresser buried the secrets. Meredith felt anger twist inside her. Anger at her mother for keeping silent, at the town for believing lies, at the families who twisted the truth to keep their own power untouched. She didn't speak. She simply breathed, slow and deep, until the anger settled into something quieter but sharper. Resolve. "We should read the rest," she said. Ethan nodded, and she began reading aloud. Evelyn had written warnings that felt eerily present. She wrote of people who asked too many questions and mysteriously disappeared, of fires in houses owned by those who had tried to expose the corruption, of a man named Samuel Rowan, who served as deputy police chief at the time, and who had allegedly been involved in beating Michael when he refused to throw the match. "Samuel Rowan?" Ethan repeated. "Isn't he still alive?" Meredith nodded. "He must be in his 70s now, still around town. I've seen him at the grocery store." Ethan looked uneasy. If he was part of this, then he might still be dangerous, she finished. She turned the page carefully, feeling the weight of every word. The entries grew more frantic as Evelyn wrote about people following her, cars idling near her house, strange phone calls in the middle of the night. She mentioned seeing the same man on the corner outside the grocery store every week, watching, waiting. She believed the family suspected her of keeping records, and she had. She kept everything. Every letter, every photograph, every newspaper clipping, every note Michael sent her after fleeing town. All carefully cataloged, all hidden in the dresser. At the bottom of Evelyn's letter was a final instruction. If you choose to seek justice, do not do it alone. These men don't fear the truth. They fear those who speak it out loud. When Meredith finished reading, silence filled the kitchen. It spread through the room like fog, thick and suffocating. She felt the full magnitude of what they had found, settling into her bones. "Mom," Ethan said quietly. We have to show someone. The police, or a lawyer, or— No. Her voice came sharper than she intended. Not yet. Why? Because these families still have ties everywhere. Connections, influence. They still have people who would protect them. Ethan stared at her. So what do we do? Just sit on it? No, she said. We read everything. We learn everything. And we find out exactly who we're up against before we go to anyone. He sat back, thinking. Worry etched into his features. What if they find out we know? The question sent a chill through her, but she answered honestly. Then we'll be ready. They spent the rest of the morning sorting through what they had found. Meredith took the diaries, marking passages that mentioned names or dates. Ethan digitized photographs using his phone, zooming in to analyze people in the background. Faces neither of them recognized, but whose presence seemed deliberate. Around noon, Meredith found a stack of letters bound in a faded ribbon. She untied them carefully. They were written by her grandmother to Michael during the months he was in hiding. The letters described her fear for him, her hope that Meredith, just a toddler then, would grow up safe, her belief that someday the truth would rise. But none of the letters revealed where Michael had gone after fleeing town. The last one was dated June 1959, months after the scandal. There were no responses, no clues, no address. Meredith's heart sank. She had grown up believing her father abandoned her. Now she faced a different ache, the ache of not knowing what had become of him. Did he survive? Did he start over? Did he think of her? Had he ever tried to return? Ethan must have noticed the shift in her expression. What is it? He disappeared, she said softly. Your grandfather vanished after 1959. There's nothing here after that. Ethan reached out and rested a hand on hers. Then maybe the dresser isn't done giving us answers. She looked at him, surprised, and then realized he was right. There could be more hidden within it. After lunch, they returned to the attic, climbed the ladder, and knelt in front of the dresser again. They removed the drawers completely and examined every inch of the interior. Meredith ran her hand along the back panel and paused. The wood felt uneven. Just slightly. The unevenness formed a rectangle perfectly measured. There's something here, she whispered. Together they pressed, pushed, and tapped along the edges until a faint crack split down the right side. The panel clicked open. Behind it was a second compartment, smaller and more concealed than the first. Inside lay a single item, a key. Old, brass, ornate. Attached to it was a note. For the lock he could not open. Meredith felt the breath knock out of her. What lock? Ethan asked. She didn't know, but her hands trembled as she held the key up to the dim attic light. The curves were intricate, the handle engraved with symbols she didn't recognize. Mom, Ethan said slowly, what if this key leads to where your father went? The thought sent her heartbeat racing. Maybe the dresser hadn't revealed its final secret. Maybe the next step in their journey wasn't inside the house at all. Maybe it was somewhere out there, waiting. Somewhere her father had left behind. And for the first time in decades, she felt something she had long buried stirring within her. Hope. A deep, trembling hope that the truth wasn't finished with them yet. It was only beginning. Meredith stood at the attic window long after she should have gone downstairs, the key resting in her palm like a living pulse. Dust spiraled lazily in the slanted afternoon light, settling on the floorboards, drifting over the dresser that had undone everything she thought she knew. Behind her, Ethan was still crouched near the open back panel, studying the empty space as though expecting another secret to materialize. His face was full of the same mixture she felt. Excitement, fear, and something deeper that connected them across the years she had spent trying to shield him from the world. When she finally descended the ladder, the key clutched tightly in her fist. She felt as though she were descending into another chapter of her life entirely, one she hadn't chosen, but also couldn't walk away from. The kitchen looked exactly as it had hours ago, quiet, familiar, small. But something in her recognized that home was no longer simply floors and walls. It was now a battlefield of truth she couldn't ignore. Ethan followed her, closing the attic door behind him. "What's our next step?" he asked. She turned the key over, tracing the engraved symbols. "I don't know. But this isn't just a keepsake. It's not decorative. Evelyn wrote, 'For the lock he could not open.' There has to be something real attached to it." "Then maybe we find the lock," Ethan said simply, as though the world was filled with hidden locks waiting for the right key. But Meredith knew this wasn't a scavenger hunt. It was the beginning of something far heavier. They spent the next hour researching, their laptops open on the dining table surrounded by diaries and letters. The symbols etched into the key looked almost like initials, or maybe Roman numerals, but no search brought up anything definitive. Meredith reached for the trophy again, examining the base. She studied the engraving under the tarnish. MH 1947 County Championship. No hidden panels there, nothing but age, metal, and memory. "What if the key belongs to something outside this house?" Ethan suggested. "Like what? A safe? A building? A car?" She tried to imagine her father leaving something behind when he fled. Something he couldn't open himself. "What about his old locker?" Ethan asked suddenly. Meredith blinked. "His locker?" "At the school," Ethan said. "Back then, they used different models. The old wing still has some original lockers. Some are sealed shut or welded. Maybe one of them belonged to him." Her instinctive reaction was to dismiss it, but she stopped herself. Her father had been a beloved student before the scandal. His name would have been assigned to a locker. And if he had left something behind, he might have trusted that Evelyn would someday know how to retrieve it. "It's a long shot," she murmured. "Everything about this is a long shot," Ethan replied softly. She looked at him, older in this moment than she had ever seen him, and nodded. "We'll go tonight. After hours. I'll call Ms. Hampton. She's the assistant principal. We've known each other since childhood." Ethan frowned. "Do you trust her?" Meredith hesitated. Trust was a fragile thing, especially now. But Ms. Hampton was one of the few members of the old Ridgewood families who had never shown cruelty or arrogance. She had been kind to Ethan during the worst of the bullying last year. More importantly, she had never been connected to the Lockwoods or the Rowans. "I trust her enough," Meredith said finally. She called Ms. Hampton, who answered on the second ring. "Meredith? Everything all right?" Her voice was warm, cautious. Meredith explained that she needed access to the old wing, that she was researching something personal regarding her father's time at the school. There was a pause, then a faint sigh. "I remember what happened to Michael," Ms. Hampton said quietly. "I remember how unfair it felt, even when I was too young to understand. If you think there's something there, I'll let you in. But come after 7. Most staff will be gone." After she hung up, Meredith felt a jolt of unease. If Ms. Hampton remembered the scandal, others would too. The old families had long roots in the school. If they learned she was digging, she took a breath and steadied herself. They would have to be cautious. Evening fell slowly, the sky turning the color of bruised lavender as they drove to the school. Meredith gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale against the leather. Ethan stared out the window, the key shining faintly on the chain around his neck. "Mom," he said after a moment, "are you scared?" "Yes," she admitted. There was no point pretending otherwise. "But fear doesn't mean we stop." He nodded, absorbing her words with a gravity she wished he didn't have to learn so young. The school looked different at night, its brick facade washed in dim security lighting, its windows dark. Ms. Hampton waited by the side entrance, holding a clipboard. She ushered them inside quickly and locked the door behind them. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered. "But if this is about your father, I'll help however I can." Meredith thanked her. Together they walked through the main hallway, their footsteps echoing. Memories flickered at the edges of Meredith's mind, teaching Ethan how to walk in these very halls during weekend events, volunteering for book fairs, standing in line during parent-teacher nights. They reached the old wing, a stretch of hallway kept mostly closed, its lockers dented and fading. Ms. Hampton unlocked the door with an old rusted key. "Take your time," she said. "But if anyone asks, you weren't here." When she left, the hallway fell silent. Ethan walked slowly down the row of lockers, running his fingers across the numbers. What number would his have been? Meredith didn't know, but she remembered her mother once saying Michael had been assigned the same locker number she herself received her freshman year. "Look for 142. They found it near the end of the hall. The paint had peeled, the metal was rusted, and the built-in padlock had no combination wheel, just a keyhole. Her pulse quickened. Ethan raised the brass key. "Mom," she swallowed. "Try it." The key slid in with a soft metallic sigh, as though it had been waiting decades for this moment. Meredith held her breath as Ethan turned it. A soft click echoed down the hallway. The locker creaked open. Inside hung a single object, a brown leather satchel with dust thick on the strap. Meredith stepped forward, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She lifted the bag gently, as if afraid it might crumble. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside were stacks of folded papers, newspaper clippings, photographs, and her breath caught a sealed envelope with her name written across it, in looping handwriting she recognized, without ever having seen in life. Michael Hendricks, her father. Ethan exhaled a shaky breath. "He left something for you." She couldn't speak. She couldn't even breathe properly. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, dated the week he vanished. "My dearest Meredith," it began. Her vision blurred instantly, but she kept reading. "By the time you read this, you will be old enough to understand what happened to me. I want you to know first that I never wanted to leave you. They made it impossible to stay. I found proof of what they were doing, illegal land seizures, bribes to local officers, and the cover-up of a boy they nearly beat to death. They demanded my silence. They wanted me to lose the championship so the Harrington boy could win. When I refused, they cornered me. Your grandmother saved me that night. She hid me long enough for me to slip away." The words tightened her throat. "If I stay, they will hurt your grandmother. They will hurt you. I have no choice but to leave Ridgewood. But I cannot take the evidence with me. It's too dangerous, and they are watching every move. I am leaving the files in this locker. Evelyn will hide the key. If she did her part, and if you're reading this, then the truth belongs to you now. Use it wisely. Use it bravely. Use it to reclaim our name." Meredith pressed a hand to her mouth, shaking. The letter ended with one last line. "You were worth every sacrifice." She broke down then, tears falling in hot waves, her chest trembling with grief she didn't know she'd been holding for decades. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, grounding her. After a long moment, she wiped her face and returned to the satchel. Inside, neatly organized despite its age, were the documents her father referenced ledgers, with signatures linking the Harrington construction funds to illegal land purchases, invoices from the Rowan family signed by law enforcement officers, lists of names with notes next to them, and newspaper clippings of missing people whose disappearances had been quietly forgotten. It wasn't just evidence, it was everything. A mapped-out blueprint of corruption that could collapse the entire power structure of Ridgewood. "Mom," Ethan whispered, "this is enough to expose all of them." "Yes," she said hoarsely, "enough to finally end the lies." But even as she said it, she realized how dangerous their position now was. They had evidence that had nearly gotten her father killed. Evidence that could ruin powerful families who were still active in the town. Evidence people would do anything to destroy. "We need to go," she said urgently. They packed the documents into the satchel and closed the locker. Ethan locked it again to make it appear untouched. They left the building the same way they came, thanking Ms. Hampton before stepping out into the night. Driving home felt surreal. The streetlights streaked gold across the windshield, the satchel resting on Meredith's lap like a heartbeat from another era. She kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting a car to appear behind them, headlights glaring, shadows closing in. But the streets remained empty. When they returned home, she laid everything on the kitchen table again. The satchel's contents spread across the wood like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. This time, the weight of the truth was almost unbearable. Ethan studied the documents silently, his eyes wide. "We need help," he said at last. "Someone outside the town. Someone who won't be influenced by them." Meredith nodded. "A journalist? Or a lawyer from outside the county?" He looked up at her, determination in his gaze. "Then that's our next step." The night stretched deep and quiet around them, the house filled only with the rustle of papers and the low hum of the refrigerator. The dresser upstairs sat silent, its secrets finally emptied. But its purpose wasn't finished. It had carried their family's truth through decades of fear. It had held the story of a man who sacrificed everything. It had protected the evidence that might finally free them. Meredith touched the letter from her father, her fingers trembling. "He wanted me to finish what he couldn't." "And we will," Ethan said. For a moment, she felt the presence of her grandmother, of her father, of generations who had endured in silence. Now, at last, their voices were rising. Outside, a car passed slowly down their street. A pair of headlights slid over the curtains before fading. Meredith stiffened, listening to the engine hum, and turned the corner. "Mom," Ethan whispered. "It's nothing," she said, though her mind whispered otherwise. It might have been nothing, or it might have been the beginning of exactly what Evelyn warned her about. The truth was out of the dresser now, out of the locker, out of the shadows, and some secrets would do anything to stay buried. Meredith took a steady breath. Whatever came next, she and Ethan would face it together, because the past had finally spoken, and the time for silence was over. If you made it this far, make sure to subscribe. Check out the other videos on your screen and keep watching. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it.